Okay, let's do part 5. Starting to make paper. It was finally time to kick the paper making into next gear, and I had more than enough motivation. In fact, I was so excited that Liz had to tell me to calm down. Today's job was to cut down the types of wood that we had decided on using based on the lumberyard foreman's advice and the information Liz had gathered. Once we had our wood, we needed to boil it by the river, soak it in water, then peel off the outer black bark while still in the forest. We would bring the peeled bark back to our storage building and let it dry. We were just making postcard-sized pieces of paper here, so we didn't need that much in the way of raw materials. Excluding firewood, which we needed a lot of to keep the water boiling for hours at a time as was necessary. Thankfully, since we were working in the forest, it wouldn't be too hard to get as much as we needed, and we could just go get more if we came close to running out. The one problem was that Liz needed to carry the pot and steamer to the forest and back, which wouldn't be easy. Thus, we began today early in the morning, going straight to borrow the storage building's key so as to get the pot and steamer. We would be working in the storage building after getting back from the forest, too, so we went ahead and told Mark that we'd be keeping the key for a while. We were completely ready, but things took an unexpected turn. Are you okay, Lutz? Yeah, replied Lutz, but he didn't look okay at all with both the steamer and pot tied to the basket on his back. He looked like he was about to be squished flat at any moment. How big is that stuff? The root of our failure was simple. When purchasing both the pot and the steamer, we had made sure to aim for a weight that Lutz could carry. And indeed, at both points, Lutz picked it up and said he would be fine carrying it. But we had never considered how heavy they would be when tied together on the basket to be carried all at once. Should I carry the steamer? It's too heavy for you. If it was too much for Lutz, it was definitely too much for me. All I could do was give him emotional support while taking care not to overexert myself on the walk to the forest. Just like always, Lutz and I began our journey to the forest with a large group of children. What's that, Lutz? What are you going to do in the forest? The children having never seen a steamer before, were curious about the stuff in Lutz's basket. We're going to make something with this pot and steamer. The basket must have been enormously heavy. Lutz's answer was short and simple, which made him sound angry, but the intrigued children kept on asking him stuff. Huh? What are you going to make? Something cool? No, this is part of a test for me to become an apprentice. Try not to get in our way. Oh, okay, got it. Good luck, Lutz. I thought the storm of questions would never end, but once the children learned that Lutz's apprenticeship was on the line here, they immediately gave him space. I asked Lutz why that was later, and apparently, despite most jobs being decided by the introduction of one's parents, most more popular workplaces tended to be swamped with applicants. Sometimes in situations like that, the parents... We saw Otto at the gate, and he wished us luck. He must have seen the stuff on Lutz's back and guessed that we were starting our paper making. Uh-huh, we'll do our best. Oh, Dad. Bye, Dad. Dad had been a little jealous lately due to me and Lutz spending so much time together. Why would you be jealous of a 6-year-old? I'm assuming they're 6 because they haven't had their baptisms, and I think they get them at 7. When I waved him goodbye, he waved back with an expression that was a mixture of a grimace and a grin. It was an expression that made it clear he didn't like how close I was with Lutz and Otto now, but was so happy to see his daughter before waving him goodbye. Dude! You are jealous of a 6-year-old! Oh my god, dear lord. I'm so tired. That was a lot heavier than I thought. Lutz placed the steamer and pot down by the river and spun his shoulders in a circle. Good work, Lutz. Want to take a break? Nah, you'll be checking up on the wood a bit after the steaming starts, right? I'll wait until then, said Lutz while he piled up stones by the river bank, leaving the groundwork for a hearth upon which to rest the pot. I expected nothing less from Lutz. He wasn't wasting a moment. In sharp contrast to Lutz's wealth of experience outside, I had basically spent all of my past life shut up inside. I couldn't hope to do what he was doing. As always, I was dead weight. The best I could do was pick up some branches lying around and hand them to him. Lutz put river water in the pot, placed it on the hearth, speedily put the wood where it needed to be, and lit the fire. I'm going to go get some more wood. Mind, you rest and keep an eye on the pot, alright? You need to rest more than I do, don't you? I don't want you passing out before the paper's ready, or after it either. You can gather some branches around here, but that's it. Don't move too much. Also, shout if anything happens, alright? Okay. Lutz was absolutely correct, so I resigned myself to quietly watching over the pot. That said, it would be a long time before the water got to boiling. It was so boring. For lack of anything else to do, I took a nearby branch and threw it into the fire. Having run out of branches near the pot, I was spreading out my search further away from it, bit by bit, when suddenly I found a red pomegranate-looking fruit half buried in the ground. Oh no. Is that the tromba? Is that the tromba fruit? Oh god, not this. Oh, what's this? Is it edible? Maybe I can get oil from it. The majority of things one could find in the forest were useful to one's daily life. Having spent a year in this world, my way of thinking had naturally been painted by its culture. Never in Japan would I have found something lying on the ground and immediately decided to pick it up to try and get some use out of it. I'll have to ask Lutz what this is. I used the twig in my hand to dig the red fruit out of the ground. I picked it up, and for some reason it got really hot all at once. Oh no, it's a weird fantasy fruit. Oh girl, that should have been a clue, because hello, you found a bunch of those. Apparently the red fruit was a brother to those weird ingredients I sometimes had to fight with to make supper. I honestly had no idea what it would do, and thus I had no idea how to deal with it. In a panic, I threw the fruit as far as I could, which meant, of course, that it barely flew a couple of meters before plopping onto the ground. Immediately, the fruit began bouncing around while making loud crackling sounds and spewing red seeds everywhere. I looked around and saw several plants sprouting from the ground around it. I watched stunned as they grew up to my ankles. What? What's going on? It's the tromba! No! It's gotta be! Things were so obviously wrong that I ran away in confusion, screaming, Lutz! 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 Something's happening! What's wrong, mine? Lutz, who had apparently been nearby, ran in my direction while pushing aside branches. He looked in the direction I was pointing, and the blood draining from his face blew his whistle. It's tromba! I knew it! It's tromba! What's that? No time to explain, said Lutz while swinging his billhook and chopping down the plants. They were already growing to our knees in height and showing no signs of stopping. It was clear that they were dangerous. Mind you go wait on the other side of the river, all right? Okay. The situation afforded us no time to talk. I followed Lutz's instructions and ran to the river. Along the way, I soon came across the rest of the kids rushing in our direction, having heard Lutz's whistle. What's going on? Wait, a tromba! Cut it down! As usual, I was the only one who didn't understand what was going on. The gathered kids all recognized the relentlessly multiplying plant and immediately raced toward it, their billhooks and knives in hand. I sat near the pot and watched the increasing number of kids slice away at the plant. Reason being, I figured that burning the plant would be a lot more effective than cutting it, or at least that would be my excuse for not running to the other side of the river. In reality, I was completely out of breath after running for less than a minute. Dang, girl, your stamina's non-existent. It looks like it's not growing anymore. As I spent some time KO'd by the riverbed, the other kids finished chopping up the rapidly growing plant. They were looking around to make sure they didn't miss any of it. Looks fine now, but there might be other trombas nearby. Keep an eye out while gathering and blow your whistle if something happens. The kids dispersed again to get back to gathering, and Lutz walked up to me. I was going to ask why you didn't go to the other side of the river, but I'm guessing it was too much for you. It was too much. I was breathing a lot harder than Lutz, despite how he was the one who had just been swinging his billhook nonstop. If someone who didn't know me saw us now, they'd probably think I had been fighting on the front lines. Lutz, what was that? A tromba. Apparently trombas were plants that grew extremely fast. If you didn't chop them down the moment they started to grow, they would suck the nutrients out of the entire surrounding area. It was possible for a tromba to get so big it was impossible for normal folks to chop down, in which case the Knight's Order would need to be summoned to destroy it. Wow, this place had a Knight's Order? Just what I expect from a fantasy world. Still, that was weird, said Lutz, sitting on a rock by the river and collecting his breath. It's too early for trombas to be showing up. Naturally, they only grow later in autumn. That one was growing super fast, too. But the ground around where it was doesn't look like it'd gone bad or anything. What's with you? Don't you think it's weird? Lutz glared at me, looking frustrated at my dry responses, but what did he expect? This was my first time seeing a tromba, so I had no idea what was weird and what was normal. Trombas in general were weird to me. What with the bulbs sprouting in it everywhere and growing so fast? I mean, I've never seen one of those before. I didn't know what's different about it or anything. Oh, right, you only started going to the forest last spring. Lutz nodded to himself, and at that moment I heard the pot start to boil. Lutz, the wood. Should be around there. Lutz pointed to where the tromba had appeared, then dropped his head in frustration. The wood he had chopped up while waiting for the water to boil was nowhere to be found. Having been lost when he ran to answer my yelling. Hey, Lutz, want to try making paper out of the tromba? Everyone just left it there, so there's a lot of it. And since you chopped it as soon as it sprouted, the fibers are probably really soft. Good thinking. Cutting more wood right now will be pretty rough. I put some of the trauma plant in the steamer and let's put it on top of the pot. All we had to do for a bit was keep feeding the fire so the water would keep boiling. I had tossed the branches I had gathered into the fire bit by bit while Lutz kept an eye on it. Mine, sorry, but could you watch the fire for a second? I'm gonna go try to find the wood I lost. Okay. Lutz, having recovered a bit from resting, stood up and went to get the wood he had abandoned in his panic. I took a branch in hand and looked at the fire. Over time, I had gotten better at managing fire so they didn't get too big, but I often would take my eyes off it just long enough for it to get out of control. Gas stoves were so convenient. Electric heaters and stuff are basically magic, really. Induction heating? How does it work? Lutz resumed his gathering while the trauma boiled. Apparently the forest grew a lot more edible plants once summer ended and autumn began, so when we switched spots at the pot, I went off to gather whatever caught my eye. I found lots of stuff, Lutz. How's it all look? Let's see. Crap, mine. Show me everything. I need to make sure we can bring them back. Lutz's expression sharpened after he saw what I had brought back, and apparently about a third of the plants were poisonous. Great. This one's no good. It'll make your limbs tingly and you won't be able to move for 3 days. This is no good either. It'll make your stomach hurt for 2 days. This is worse. You'll froth at the mouth and die if you eat it. Mine, if you don't learn those things, you're gonna die of poison before any sickness can get you. He's right. If I don't properly learn these plants, both me and my family will die. Since I had no choice but to keep living in this world, I need to boost up the priority of distinguish what's poisonous on my list of things to do. Without a field guide at hand, I need to learn from the guidance of another. I'll do my best to learn them, but I'll need you to teach me then. Yeah. We heard the faint sound of a bell from the direction of the city, so we took off the steamer. There was enough steam to heat up my face, but just looking wasn't enough to tell if the wood was sure, but I'm going to try putting it in the river and peeling the bark off. I dunked the wood in the river and tried peeling the bark while it was still hot. It came right off without breaking apart, easier than I expected. It just might have found some good material. This trauma wood might be perfect for making paper. Nobody knows where they'll pop up, so there's no telling if we'll always be able to get young trauma before they grow. Aw, then this definitely won't work. I sighed, thinking back to how suddenly the trauma had appeared. Too bad. It would have been perfect if we could cultivate them somehow. Hey, mine, is that all we gotta do today? Uh-huh. Now we have to wait for this bark to dry. Alright, I'll leave the peeling to you while I clean this pot up. Let's begin washing the pot and the steamer in the river so we could leave. Sitting down by the river and peeling bark was surprisingly fun, so I hummed to myself while peeling away. It was time to go back to the city, so I put the bark into my basket, along with the various things I had gathered. Lutz pumped himself up and lifted up the pot and steamer on his back. He had his gathered stuff, so the way back for him would be even heavier than the way here. Lutz and I both... Turn it off! Lutz and I both wobbled back to town and separated from the others to go to the storage building. He unlocked the door and put the stuff down. Ah, so heavy. The stuff you gathered added a lot, huh? I wish I could hold some of it for you. Unfortunately, carrying my own gathered material was literally the best I could do. I didn't have a lick of strength to spare. We sat down on the floor of the storage building. Lutz took out some of the black bark from inside of the pot and waved it in my direction. Hey, mine, how are we supposed to dry this stuff? And where? Huh? I wonder. In my mind, I had envisioned drying the bark by hanging it from a central pillar like one does rice straw, but we didn't have a stick to use like that. I looked around, searching for something we could use, then plopped a hand on Lutz's shoulder. Lutz, I'm sorry to ask this while you're tired, but could you beat some nails into the shelf with an equal amount of space between each one? It's important for drying the bark. Fine. I placed the black bark onto the nails that Lutz hammered for me. This would work for now, while we didn't have much bark. When it came time to mass-produce the paper, we would need more space for drying. But, well, at that point, we could just ask Benno for help. We didn't need more space just now. We need to get the bark completely dry. Mold will grow otherwise. Maybe we should bring it to the forest tomorrow and dry it out under the sun. So we're just going to be drying the bark tomorrow, yeah? Nothing else? I guess I'll be able to do some normal gathering then. That's a big help. There's a lot of stuff I gotta get real soon. I know I want to get lots of mushrooms and dry them. That'll make good mushroom broth. Learn which mushrooms are poisonous first. The next day I went to the forest with the black bark, rested them on the corner of my basket, and gathered a lot of mushrooms while I dried under the sun. Incidentally, 20% of those mushrooms were poisonous. I just don't get it. How does this keep happening? Surely your memory is good when it comes to that. You know how to freaking make paper, for crying out loud. Several days under the sun, dried the black bark completely. I wasn't sure at what exact point it became completely dry, so I initially dried it past the point that it looked acceptable. Then I took the crackly bark and went to the forest. The next step was to dunk it in the river for over an entire day, so the weather was important. We went to a part of the river where people generally didn't go to, moved rocks into a circle shape, then put the black bark inside in such a way that it wouldn't get washed away. Is that all? Probably. Let's check again before we go home. My lack of experience made it hard for me to feel confident, but I was pretty sure that this was how you did it. I looked down at my feet in the river. It was a warm day, and therefore the river felt fine, but as the seasons advanced onward, entering the river would run the risk of death due to the cold. Naturally, this world doesn't have rubber gloves or boots. I think we should experiment with other types of wood before it gets too cold. We won't be able to go into the river. Good point. It's already pretty cold, too, agreed Les, his face scrunched up at the thought of entering the river during frosty weather. Let's cut up the wood now and hide it like when we made the clay tablets. If we're going to bring the steamer and pot here tomorrow, you won't want to carry the wood, too, right? We searched for wood that looked like it would make good paper and cut it down, organized the wood by type, and hid it all beneath a low-hanging tree. We occasionally checked the black bark while gathering. The bark, surrounded by stones amid the water, wasn't getting washed away and was instead swelling up as it absorbed water. I was worried about leaving it here, but it looks like it's doing fine. Even after forcing myself to go home, I couldn't help but think constantly about the bark we had left behind. What if a random deluge overflowed the river and washed it away? What if bandits came and stole it, thinking they'd found mysterious treasure? Weird thoughts came to my mind one after another as I stared vacantly at the ceiling. The next day my heart was beating like crazy on the way to the forest, but the black bark was right where we left it, with no bandits in sight. Whew, I'm so glad it's still here. So, what now? Let's pick up the water-swollen bark and tilted his head. We peel off the outer layer of the bark with a knife so that only the inner white bark is left. But first, let's start steaming the wood from yesterday. We can work with the bark while the wood is getting steamed. The stone hearth we made last time was still there, so after some minor fixes, we put the pot and steamer in place. Once that was done, Les and I began cutting off the outer layer of the bark on a large flat stone near the pot. We can leave the dried bark on this stone. Let's try to finish making the white bark while it's still warm. You got it. We placed the black bark on the stone and peeled off the outside black bark, leaving only the white inner bark. It felt like peeling the tendons out of chicken. But the bark wasn't that strong, so it broke apart mid-slice. This would probably be better with more efficient tools, but this was the best we could manage. Hey, mine, this works, but, we could really use a cutting board. The screeching sound and bone-vibrating sensations of the knife hitting the stone gave me goosebumps that just wouldn't go away. I really sincerely wished we had a flat board to cut this bark on. When making that list of stuff we needed, I had written down everything that came to mind, but now that we were actually doing the work, I realized there was a lot I had forgotten about or otherwise didn't consider. I thought I knew what I was doing, but it was just too complicated. We would need to add to our arsenal bit by bit while we were working and realizing what we lacked. While peeling off the bark with tears in my eyes and goosebumps on my skin, I became painfully aware of just how important real-life experience really was. Painful mistakes. Oh. Today's job was to bring the pot and ashes to the forest and boil some of the white bark for about a bell's time while the black bark from the other wood dried in the sun. Litz's step was brisker than usual, probably because the pot alone wasn't that heavy for him, even with the ashes we were using today thrown in. After reaching the riverbed, I hung the black bark on my basket so the sun would dry it. Meanwhile, Let's prepared the pot. After placing the water-filled pot on the makeshift stone hearth, we went to go get firewood. Listen, mine, don't leave the pot alone no matter what. I know that already. The pot and ashes were both very valuable, both monetarily and in the sense we couldn't replace them on our own. We didn't want the white bark to get stolen either, so we absolutely needed someone to keep watch over our stuff, even if that someone was dead weight like me. Let's, knowing that I had recently been putting more effort into gathering and therefore wandering all over the place, made sure to drive the point home hard. It sucked. You say you know that, but I know you'll just wander off the second you see something interesting. I won't leave the pot alone until you come back, so hurry and do what you need to do. When I first came to the forest, I tried setting my basket down and exploring without it since it was so heavy, but Lutz and Tuli got super mad at me. Unlike Japan, it wasn't safe to set something down and go somewhere where you couldn't see it. Thievery was a constant risk, which was exactly why the kids would carry their baskets on their own back and only gather what they could carry home themselves. Lutz ignited the wood he had quickly gathered and then went off to get more. I placed the black bark on the basket under the sun and watched the pot, while occasionally adjusting the basket as the shadows moved. Is it boiling? I think it's about ready. I put the ashes and the white bark into the bubbling water, then realized I needed a stick to stir it, but I didn't have anything like that. No, something else I forgot about. Depressed in my feeble imaginations and inability to predict these problems, I looked around to see if there was anything I could use. We need 2 sticks of about the same length to stir the pot. The bark of normal wood would peel off in the water, so bamboo is preferable. There should be bamboo close by, right? 2 bamboo sticks, huh? Alright. Let's found some bamboo and cut them on the spot to make 2 equally long sticks, which I used like cooking chopsticks to stir the pot. He must have gotten a lot better at dealing with bamboo while struggling to make those strips, I thought to myself. After a bit of stirring, I heard Lutz mumble something. Mine, you're stirring with those sticks pretty well. Huh? Yeah, pretty good, right? I gave a fake smile, but a cold sweat was gushing down my back. There was no Eastern food here, and thus nobody used chopsticks. As far as I knew, nobody even owned a pair. There wasn't a little girl in the world who would casually ask for sticks to stir a pot and then hold them like chopsticks rather than grip them individually, one by the ends. Oh no, Lutz is looking at me weird. It's just my imagination. I'm imagining things. There's no way he's suspicious. No way. I kept stirring the pot while avoiding reality. It'd be more suspicious if I changed how I was holding them just because he said something. My only choice was to charge ahead, but my heart wouldn't stop pounding. Yes, you're holding them like He is so suspicious. Just the look on his face. He is suspicious. He's like, what the fuck is this girl doing? Hang on. I'm trying to adjust how I'm sitting. Actually, what am I doing? I ain't gonna sit long like that. I'm an idiot. A big dumb idiot. I'm basically asking him to get suspicious. I forced as normal of a smile as possible onto my face and kept stirring the boiling white bark until eventually I heard the faint ringing of bells. It was time. I dunked the boiled bark into the river and washed off the ash while letting the sun hit it. That should make the bark whiter. I had no idea if the plants of this world functioned the same way, but I have no choice but to work with what I knew. And now we leave this bark here for a full day. Alright. We needed to leave the white bark in the river for a full day as well, in order for the paper to be as white and pretty as possible. After Lutz washed the pot, we took turns going gathering. I was picking up noticeably fewer poisonous plants than before. Hopefully I could keep up the good pace. Today our main paper-related duty was to taking the white bark home from the forest. We would gather like normal in the forest, then when it was about time to go home, we would take the white bark out of the river. We were bringing buckets from home with us to hold the white bark instead of the pot, but that was all we needed to do. We're going to be working in the storage building from now on. Alright, guess we gotta gather as much as we can today, huh? I gathered a lot of edible plants, vetted by Lutz, marrows, picked by Lutz, and finally lots of crayons to cook into jam. I tasted the crayons several times while gathering them. They were a lot more sour than Japanese fruits, but my diet was so lacking in anything sweet, but they tasted delicious. When the sun rose on the next day, we didn't go to the forest and instead began work in front of the well by the storage building. I had to do the crud picking and the water switching all in one go to finish the paper today, since once you get this far, you had to go all the way. Crud picking was removing knots and broken bits from the white bark's fibers. It could be done while sitting, so I volunteered to do it myself. While I was fiddling away at the fibers, Liz was peeling the edible fruit, crushing them and putting water on them to make the tororo. Hey, mine, is this whatever tororo is supposed to be? Probably. It feels sticky, so it should be fine, even though I'm not really sure. I'll think about it when I see how sticky the fibers are when I'm mixing them. After finishing the crud picking, it was time to beat the fibers. Liz took a hard rectangular club made from what looked like evergreen oak, and beat the white bark's fibers until they were fluffy like cotton. He just kept swinging with his hand, clutching the handle at the bottom, carved by the people from the lumber yard, wrapped in a cloth he brought from home to avoid hurting his hand. That was Litz's job. I would just get in the way if I tried helping with my little arms. He finished fast since we didn't have many fibers to work with, but things would get a lot more serious when mass production became involved. Subsequently, we put the loosened fibers into the wash tub along with the Tororo and started adding water bit by bit, regulating the stickiness. Normally use a rake or something like a comb to stir, but there wasn't much bark here, so I had to. Let's make me 2 more pair of sticks, which I stuck into the pot to stir. I'm pretty sure this is what it was like with the milk cartons after I put the starch in. As I wasn't a craftsman, I couldn't really balance things well on feel alone, but I scraped up as much of my memories as possible and successfully made the fiber water. With that done, it was finally time to make the paper and the tsuketa. All that time I spent making the 2-part frame, and the screen was building up to this moment. Whew, finally, something I understand. My memories of making recycled paper from milk cartons in school went as follows. Boil the carton, peel off the shiny part, mix it up, add laundry starch, swish in the tsuketa, and dry. This was the first time that my experience making paper would be useful for making washi. Finally, after so long, it's my time to shine. Thank goodness for experience points. You really know what you're doing. Uh-oh, he's gonna get suspicious. Let's watch me ready the tsuketa, tilting his head a bit and looking at me with extreme suspicion. I mean, sure, I was pretty vague about a lot of things, and once we got going, I realized I forgot a lot of things, but all that had to do with my lack of experience. A little peeved at Lutz not trusting me, I puffed out my little girl cheeks and held up my chin. Yeah, you can trust me, I've done this before. Why did you say that? Why did you say that? Why did you say that? He'll have no experience in that world as mine making that stuff. So he is going to automatically assume that something's up. Yeah, when and where, said Lutz sharply, his brows furrowed. His voice made my heart freeze even over for a second. That's a girl's secret. Don't even think about prying. I'm so dumb. Why would I say that? Lutz is giving me a super flat stare right now. He's totally looking at me. Did I just throw myself off a cliff there? Yep. I covered up my internal screaming with a fake smile and put the murky fiber water into the tsuketa. My fingers were trembling a little, but I pretended not to notice. Once the water was inside, I started moving the tsuketa side to side, up to down. Why do you move it like that? Well, moving it like this spreads the pulpy water out, so the paper will end up equally thick throughout. Also, depending on the type of paper and how thick you want it, you could just repeat this for longer. Uh-oh. He's getting so suspicious. I think she does end up telling him at some point, but... Oh, yeah, because he demands that she bring mine back. I think. No, that's her worst case on that. I think. Huh, interesting. You know that because you've done this before. Lutz's eyes dug into me, and I knew that not the slightest change of expression would escape him. I didn't know what I could say to avoid the question. All I could do was fall silent or forcefully change the subject. Lutz, I'm thinking about experimenting with this and seeing how the number of movements impacts the thickness of the paper. What do you think? Lutz must have not liked me dodging the question. I could feel his gaze hardening as he looked between me and the tsuketa which I was still moving around. I felt like I just climbed the cliff to fall off it again. Once the swishing was done, I took the screen out of the frame and moved the filter paper to the drying bed. Be sure to not let the air get in between the pieces of paper while you're stacking them on top of each other. Start at the edge and work your way down. I'll give it a shot. Let's took our other screen and put it into the frame, then began swishing water to make paper. We were just making a postcard's worth of paper, so a couple of bumps was all it took to get it all spread out equally. Lutz and I took turns swishing the water around almost silently. I had expected the white bark to be enough for 3 pieces of paper, but I was way off the mark. We ended up with 10 sheets in this end. Dang. We don't have a ton of paper right now, but anyway, we leave the day's paper stacked on the drying bed. The water will naturally drain out after a full day. Then what? We gently press weights on the paper to squeeze more water out. We can just leave the weights on them for another full day. That'll get rid of all the Tororo stickiness. Wow, you sure know a lot about this. Oh, right. Didn't you say you've done this before or something? Oof, that look hurts. He's definitely figured me out. I didn't just go off the cliff, I leaped off of it. I'm so stupid. However, despite glaring at me and clearly having something on his mind, Lutz didn't say anything final. I didn't want to climb up the cliff yet again for another humiliating self-destruction, so I just got to work making paper without saying anything unnecessary. I had already failed at avoiding the subject, and telling the truth was just too risky. I could guess that he would say something once we finished making paper, but I didn't know how much he had guessed, nor what he would say to me. I had already thought up a solution for this, so really there wasn't a problem. I didn't like pain, and I didn't want to be afraid. If things got painful or scary, I just had to unleash the heat inside of me and let it swallow me up. Lately, it felt like the heat was getting stronger, so it probably wouldn't take that long for it to consume me entirely. The problem was, unlike last time, I now had a strong attachment to this world. All we had left with the paper was to let it dry. There was basically nothing that could go wrong, and with paper taken care of, I wanted to at least make books before disappearing. I wonder if I can buy time until then. I want to buy that time. I have to postpone my death until I can make a book. With those thoughts in mind and clouds over my heart, I continued working. The next day we walked to the forest in almost total silence. I put the black bark into the river, and then we went off gathering. We stopped by the storage building to put the weights on, but that was all we had to do. I couldn't help but find myself thinking about what Lutz was feeling. I could tell he was thinking the same about me, judging by his frequent glancing my way. Hey. What's up? Lutz speaking up made me reflexively shiver. I had thought I was keeping a cool head about things, but my body just wouldn't back my thoughts up. Trembling, I waited for Lutz to continue, but he just scratched his blonde hair roughly with his mouth open and shutting. Never mind. Oh? I knew that I was reaping what I had sown, but still, letting this drag on was really hurting me. The day after that, I remembered to bring a cutting board, and we peeled off the outer bark. Unlike the trauma bark, it was really hard to get off. The fibers ended up all crumbly. That wasn't just me being clumsy either. Lutz was having the same problem. The trauma's fibers were perfect, but I was questioning whether this other stuff could be usable at all. I guess different woods are easier to work with. Yeah, pretty much. The crumbled fibers resembled my relationship with Lutz so much I couldn't help but sigh. Once this white bark dries, we'll be good for a while. Alright, hey. Scratch that. I'll say it after the paper's done, said Lutz before falling silent. I gave a small nod and steeled my resolve. Lutz had realized I wasn't mine and was on the verge of accusing me of being a fake. There was no doubt about it. After all, he hadn't called me mine once since the day I self-destructed. Just what would he say once the paper was ready? How would he interrogate me? Would he yell at me? My imagination was unfortunately too vivid when it came to this kind of thing, so the Lutz in my imagination was saying all sorts of cruel, heartless things. My own mind drove spears through my heart, making me hang my head. That's just going too far, Lutz. You're being cruel. Imagination or not, I'm gonna cry. I really am. I can't blame him for being suspicious. We worked in the storage building the following day. First, Lutz and I took the white bark we made yesterday, hung it from our baskets, and put them outside. Then we delicately took the pressed paper off the drawing board sheet by sheet and stuck them to a board. Normally we'd use a paintbrush to gently get the air bubbles out, but I forgot to order one. Whoops. The paper's small enough that we should be fine anyway. You forget way too many things. Lutz glared at me, but since I had recently been imagining a non-stop barrage of pure vitriol coming out of his mouth, that wasn't enough to faze me. I shrugged and blew it off. We just need to get one ready before we make our second batch. More importantly, once these sheets dry under the sun, we're done. Sunlight should make the paper even whiter. Lutz took the board outside and placed it against a wall where the sun was shining. He then washed the drying bed by the well and placed it next to the board so it could dry. The white paper drying beneath a clear blue sky could only be described as beautiful, and imagining that this was the first step toward a future of books made me sigh in satisfaction. Ah, paper. It's real. Actual paper. We really made it. Hey, but we're not done yet. The paper needs to dry until evening. Once they're dry, we'll peel them off slowly so they don't rip, and then we'll be done, I said, trying to postpone the paper being done so I could stall my conversation with Lutz as much as possible. He must have figured that out, though, given the frustrated look on his face. So it's basically done already, right? Well, that's not untrue, but I told you I had something to say once the paper was done, remember? Oh boy, here we go. It was time for the interrogation. Lutz's green eyes shone with a ferocious light, his anger coming to the forefront. I bit my lip and faced him, planting my feet solidly on the ground so I would stay upright no matter what he said to me. Oh boy, hang on, let me check and see how far I've gotten. Are we going to talk out here, or do you want to go into the storage building? Here is fine. I thought it'd be better for us to have this conversation in private, but Lutz shook his head. So, what do you want to talk about? Lutz's green eyes were burning with anger, but he was still calm. He didn't suddenly scream at me. Instead, he spoke in a low voice and made it clear something was boiling deep inside of him. Who are you? His first question was a hard one. Who was I indeed? I still personally consider myself to be Urano Motosu, but no matter how you looked at me, I was mine. And having spent a year in this world, in this body, I wasn't really Urano Motosu anymore. Too much had changed. Urano was a girl who only ever read books, and never had the initiative to do anything herself. She never even left home since her college was only a short distance from her parents' place. She would help if you asked for it, but in general left all the chores to her mother. There was nothing she proactively did on her own. Basically, she never had the need to go to the forest daily to gather the barest essentials in life to survive. She didn't have to experiment with cooking to enrich her meals as much as possible. She didn't have to make paper in order to read books. Urano just followed her whims and read the books around her, which was nothing like who I had become. Litz interpreted my silent struggle to find an answer as me deciding not to answer. So he glared at me and spoke with even more force than before. You said you know how to make paper like this because you've made it before, right? Well, I used pretty different methods the last time I made paper. Mine couldn't have done that. Oh, he knows. My repeated failures to hide the truth had brought less to certainty, and no amount of lying could solve this. I nodded, hiding nothing. Mine couldn't know any of this. She barely ever left her house. I also knew from Mine's memories that she had barely left the house, just how hard had I struggled thanks to how little she knew. It was immeasurable and the source of half my problems. Mine knew nothing but the inside of her home, and thus I had no opportunity to learn what was common sense in this world. My own ideals clashing with the world's expectations of me had not been pleasant, and to this day I failed to be normal on a frequent basis. That's true. Mine really didn't know anything about anything. Then who are you? Where'd the real mine go? I knew it. Give her back. Let's shouted, furious, but for some reason, maybe because he had been much more cruel in my imagination, maybe because I'd been preparing for this moment ever since we finished making the paper, I felt surprisingly calm. This was nothing like my panic after self-destruction. I can give you back the real mine, but we should go back to my place first. Litz must not have expected a compliant answer. His eyes opened wide in shock, then narrowed in suspicion. Why's that? Well, it'll be hard for you to carry back a corpse, right? If I leave, I think the only thing I'll leave behind is a corpse. You don't want my family thinking you killed me, right? Do you? My family, Benno, and his employees all knew that Lutz and I had spent the day together thanks to us using the storage building. If I passed out in the storage building and died just like that, it was very likely that all the blame would fall on Lutz. And even if it didn't, Lutz would probably feel guilty after anyway. I had suggested we go home first for Lutz's benefit, but he looked like I had just dumped cold water on his face. Oh, what the heck are you saying? Lutz was shocked, and he began floundering with a tense expression. He hadn't expected that mine wouldn't come back if I disappeared. Are you saying mine's gone for good? She won't ever come back? Uh-huh, probably. I can always say probably. I knew mine's memories, but nothing more. As I had never talked to mine, she had never asked for her body back. Just tell me this. Lutz glared at me sharply, entirely like a superhero fighting an evil villain. Thinking about it that way made me smile a little. From his perspective, that was definitely how this looked. I was an evil witch who stole a weak little girl's body, and Lutz was a superhero trying his best to save her. The girl he considered a little sister of sorts. You talked to Otto and Mr. Benno about some kind of heat, right? Are you that heat? Did you eat mine? That's crazy. I was honestly a little impressed that Lutz had guessed that the heat in my body had eaten mine. He was right about that part specifically. You're half right, half wrong. I think that the real mine was eaten by this heat, too. Her final memories were thus, it's hot. Help me, it hurts, I hate this. Nothing but misery and pain, but that heat isn't me. And the heat's trying to eat me, too. What's that supposed to mean? Aren't you evil? Didn't mine disappear because of you? Tell me that's what happened. Lutz grabbed my shoulders and shook me. He was probably heating up since his expectations were off the mark, but his specific wording, aren't you evil, and didn't mine disappear because of you, really ticked me off. I didn't come here and take mine's body because I wanted to. I died, and when I woke up, I was this kid. If I could have chosen where to go myself, I would have stolen a noble's body so I could read books. And I wouldn't have chosen a weak and sickly body either. Who would want a body that's sick with a horrible disease, one that feels like fire is eating you alive? The moment I shouted that didn't want mine's body, a completely stunned look washed over Lutz's face, and he loosened his grip on my shoulders. You didn't want to become mine? Would you? At first I couldn't even leave my house without getting out of breath and catching a fever. I've finally gotten strong enough to reach the forest, but this body takes forever to grow, and even now I get sick if I let my guard down for a second. I can barely do anything. Lutz fell into thought for a bit, then shook his head. His intensity from moments prior vanished, and his eyes became wandering, uncertain. Is this heat gonna eat you too, like it ate mine? I think so. If I stop holding it in for even a second, the heat bursts out and starts eating me alive. It feels kind of like I'm being swallowed up by it, like I'm being broken apart and vanishing. It's hard to explain. My explanation must not have been clear enough, as Lutz furrowed his brow and fell into thought. What I'm saying is, if you don't like me using mine's body and want me to disappear, just say so. I can disappear at any moment. Despite having told me to give the real mine back, Lutz was looking at me with a shocked expression for some reason. Because he's gotten used to you. You've been around him for a year. He's barely been around the real mine. Because all you've known is that you've been at home. Mine's been at home for 5 years before she eventually succumbed to the devouring? And you accompanied the body? So yeah, he knows you. He's not going to let you disappear, even though he wants the real mine back. Look at me with a shocked expression for some reason, which really wasn't good for me. I wanted a clear answer from him. It would be better for me to disappear, right? I asked for confirmation, which made Lutz's eyebrows shoot up. He yelled at me angrily. Don't ask me! Why would you ask me that? What do you mean you'll disappear if I tell you to? That doesn't make sense. It doesn't, but if it wasn't for you, I would have disappeared a long time ago. Lutz looked completely baffled, so I talked to him about the time I almost disappeared. Do you remember the time I collapsed after Mom burned my mockin? Yeah, now that you mention it, something like that did happen. For Lutz, it was just another day, but for me, it was one of the most important days of my life, a grand crossroads of fate. When that happened, I didn't care if the heat ate me. I was completely ready to just disappear. A world without books meant nothing to me. And no matter how hard I worked, I couldn't finish one myself, so I just stopped caring. I heard Lutz gulp hard. His eyes told me to keep going, so I closed my own and thought back to that day. The heat was swallowing me up, and as the faces of my family passed through my mind, Lutz's face suddenly popped up. I was thinking about my family as I was dying, and suddenly your face popped up in the middle of theirs. I didn't get it. I craned forward to try and see your face, and before I knew it, the heat was receding. I woke up. You were actually there. That really surprised me. I don't get it. You were surprised because I'm not part of your family, right? I didn't help you or nothing. Lutz furrowed his brows inside. I shook my head. I woke up because I was surprised, but don't you remember how you were going to get bamboo my parents couldn't burn? Thinking about that helped me fight back the heat, I think. But your mom still burned that bamboo, didn't she? I nodded. I could still remember the hollow feeling I felt that day after the anger and frustration faded. It was so horrible I could feel the heat inside of me getting stronger just at the thought of it. I just gave up on everything, and the heat exploded just like that. I didn't even feel like fighting back, and would have just let myself die right there. But then I remembered my promise to you. Promise? I don't remember no promise. Muttered Lutz, looking up a bit to try and remember. His must have really forgotten about it. Figures, I whispered to myself with a smile. To Lutz it had probably been just a way to say get better and nothing more, but still to me it was what kept me tied to this world. The promise to introduce you to Otto. You wanted me to hurry and get better since you had done your part of the deal, remember? The moment Lutz heard me say that, he let out an embarrassed groan and grabbed his head as if that was something he really hadn't wanted to remember. I wasn't trying to make you owe me or anything, crap. Why did you say it then? Don't ask me that, let it go, forget about it. I wanted to tease Lutz, but I was the one in the middle of interrogation. I granted his request and let it go, pretending not to notice his embarrassment. Anyway, I remembered the promise and thought I shouldn't disappear before doing my part of the deal, so I pushed the heat back down. We met up with Otto and Benno after that, which means I fulfilled my promise. Now that we've made paper, I'd really like to keep going and make books, but if you really want me to disappear, I will. Lutz looked at me with his face scrunched up, conflicted. He looked me up from head to toe as if he was saying he won't let a single lie slip past him. Since when? What? I couldn't hear what Lutz mumbled since his head so low. His head shot up and he looked me in the eye. Since when have you been mine? When do you think? At what point do you think the mine you knew disappeared? I answered his question with a question, but he didn't get mad. He just glared at the empty air with a serious expression on his face, thinking. He looked at me, let out a quiet mumble, and kicked his feet at the ground. After some time thinking, he let out a gasp and looked up, pointing at my hair stick. Since you started wearing that thing. hadn't expected him to get it exactly right, but it was true that nobody but me used hair sticks here. If I didn't have such smooth and straight hair that would break free of any hairband, I probably would have used a string instead of a stick like that. That's right. So it's been a whole freaking year? Litz's eyes shot open and he yelled so loud spit came out of his mouth. Speaking of which, I had become mine at the end of last autumn. We were in the middle of autumn now with winter fast approaching. Uh-huh. I spent most of my time here sick in bed, but it's been about half a year. About half of my memories here involved passing out and catching fevers, but still, that was better than the original mine who spent almost every waking moment in bed. Your family hasn't noticed? Who knows? They've noticed I'm different, but I don't think anyone has realized I'm not actually mine. It was hard for me to believe that Thule and Mom weren't at least somewhat suspicious given how they had been constantly taking care of the old mine before my arrival. But they hadn't said anything to me, and I in turn wouldn't say anything to them. Our lives were going just fine, no need to rock the boat. Plus, my dad said that he was just happy I was finally getting healthy. Alright. Let's let out a sigh and turn his back to me as if to say the conversation was over. He touched the paper stuck to the board and felt that it had begun to dry. But I had come here expecting to disappear. The conversation ending without a conclusion was too much for me to bear. Hey, I think this is something for your family to decide, not me. Lutz interrupted me before I finished. He thought that my family should be the ones to decide if I should disappear. As it stood, that meant nothing would happen. So, we're gonna stay like this for now? That's how it is. I couldn't tell what Lutz was thinking since he wasn't looking my way. Did he not care if I kept on living in mine's body despite not being her? You don't mind, Lutz? Like I said, it's not up to me. Lutz just wouldn't look at me, so I grabbed his arm. I wanted to ask what Lutz thought of me, the girl who wasn't mine. He got so mad that talking about this. Would it really be fine with things just staying the same? Yeah, he doesn't want to talk about it because that is not his decision to make. But at the same time, he's gotten so accustomed to you over the year that I don't think he would. He just doesn't want to admit it. You don't want me to disappear, Lutz, even though I'm not the real mine? Lutz's arm twitched. I thought that Lutz's arm was trembling in my hand, but in reality it was just my own hand that was shaking. I don't. Why? After repeated questioning, Lutz finally looked my way. Then he flicked my cheek. Mine won't come back, even if you leave, right? And if you've been her for a whole year, then the mine that I know is mostly just you, he said, scratching his blonde hair. He then firmly locked eyes with me. His light green eyes were calm, his rage and seriousness from earlier having completely evaporated. He looked just like he usually did. Mine had never thought about exercising to build up strength, so she was even weaker than me. In truth, you could count on both hands how many times she had ever met Lutz or Ralph in her entire life. Yeah, I'm fine with you being my mine. Aww. That sounds sweet. I'm sorry. Just the way it's said. Lutz's statement made something click inside of me, like something that had been floating suddenly fell into place. It was a small thing that didn't seem so important on the outside, but to me the change couldn't have been more significant. Aww. Aww. Okay. I'm gonna have to end it here. I'll see you guys next time.